The Star-Spangled Banner and all its successors have come to embody our country, what we think of as America. You can neither honor the past nor imagine the future without the kind of citizenship embodied by all of our memories of this flag. President William J. Clinton. For several reasons, President James Madison declared war on the British in the year of 1812. Known as the Second War of Independence, this war would finish once and for all any British interference in America. After a successful campaign at Fort George, President Madison assigned Major George Armistead to Fort McHenry, where he took charge on June 27, 1813. Shortly after his arrival at Fort McHenry, Armistead reported the following to General Samuel Smith. "We, sir, are ready at Fort McHenry to defend Baltimore against invading by the enemy, except that we have no suitable ensign to display over the Star Fort, and it is my desire to have a flag so large that the British will have no difficulty in seeing it from a distance." Mrs. Mary Pickersgill lived in Baltimore, and as she had lost her husband recently, was in the business of making flags with the help of her mother and her daughter Caroline. In this family room, Mary received her instructions to make two flags: the large garrison flag, 30 by 42 feet, and a smaller storm flag. Mary's house wasn't big enough to sew such a huge flag, so Mary, Caroline, and several other women sewed by the light of oil lamps throughout the evenings at a brewery just down the street. These were hectic days for Mary, her mother, and Caroline. But finally, on August 19, 1813, the flags were delivered to the fort, and Mrs. Pickersgill received $405.90 for the large garrison flag and $168.54 for the smaller flag. That was a lot of money in those days. General George Armistead now had his flags, and Baltimore and Fort McHenry were ready for the war. After burning Washington, D.C. to the ground, the British fleet headed for Baltimore. Baltimore was a much larger and more important city, and the British were determined to teach the Americans a lesson. As the soldiers in the fort readied themselves, they were not surprised to see the approach of three British frigates: the Seahorse, Surprise, and Severn. It was mid-afternoon on September 12th. Directly behind these ships were the bomb vessels Meteor, Devastation, Etna, Volcano, and Terror, and the ship carrying the rocket explosives, the deadly Erebus. 35-year-old lawyer and amateur poet Francis Scott Key had witnessed the burning of Washington, D.C. He and his friend John Skinner were outraged that a local doctor, Dr. William Beans, had been captured by the British and was being held prisoner on one of the ships. Under a flag of truce, they sailed to the British ship, boarded it, and asked for the release of their friend. Realizing that the men had learned of the British plans to attack the fort that very day, they released Dr. Beans, but held all 3 men on board as the battle began. The British started bombing at 6:30 a.m. on September 13, 1814, and continued for 25 hours. At first, the fort returned fire, but the British were out of range. As the British warships moved in, the mighty cannon of Fort McHenry roared to life and blasted the Erebus, the devastation, and the volcano. Bombs fell at a rate of 1 a minute. The men in the fort watched the bombs as they burst in the air and lit up the nighttime sky. The 3 Americans on board the British ship were watching helplessly. The firing suddenly stopped at 7 o'clock a.m. Francis Scott Key grabbed a telescope, trying desperately to see how the fort had withstood the brutal attack. To his amazement and the joy of all American soldiers, the British began to retreat, and through the fog and smoke, all could see the huge flag waving proudly over Fort McHenry. This so inspired Key that he took his pen and an old envelope out of his pocket and started writing the poem that we now call the Star-Spangled Banner.
Over the course of 25 hours in 1814, soldiers of the regular army, sailors of the United States Navy, citizen militia from Baltimore and Maryland stood in the pouring down rain and manned their guns, firing back at the British fleet and keeping them at bay, going deaf in the process, trying to move 2-ton cannon while sopping wet and thoroughly exhausted. But because of what they did, the fort did not fall. Baltimore, unlike Washington, was not burned. And at dawn's early light, 50,000 people in the city of Baltimore could answer Francis Scott Key's question that yes, the Star-Spangled Banner did still wave over the ramparts of Fort McHenry. Clear! Fire! Huzzah! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Huzzah!
Our flag had many homes until it finally came to rest at the Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. Many pieces had been cut from it as souvenirs. Insects had chewed through it, a star had been cut off and given away. For many years it hung in the entrance of the American History Museum. Slowly it was disintegrating and fading away from exposure to light and air. In 1998 it was removed and for 10 years underwent extensive renovation. Today, our flag resides in a special air and light-controlled room in the new American History Museum at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. So, as you see this flag and leave this place, promise yourself that when your great-grandchildren are here, they'll not only be able to see the Star-Spangled Banner, it will mean just as much to them then as it does to you today. President William J. Clinton.